Thank you very much, Meredith. I'm glad to be here. And the first two speakers have told us a lot about the Spaniards and their encounters with the Indians. And my talk, which is focused on Southwest Florida, the domain of the Calusa Indians, I'm going to turn the tables a little bit and talk a little bit more about the Indians and what their expectations of the Spaniards were. So to go ahead and get started then, I want to talk briefly about what happened in 1513, but Dr. Gannon has already covered a lot of it, so I will mention the 1521 voyage. And then I want to talk about the cultural context of the encounters between the Calusa people and the Spaniards. One of the reasons I want to focus on the Calusa, other than the fact that I know more about that area of Florida than any other, is that the only real written account of the interactions between the Spaniards and Ponce de León, the Indians in Ponce de León, was with the Calusa Indians. And that the document really that we all use, and that it really is the summary of this expedition, is the Herrera account. Herrera was appointed chief historian of the Indies almost at the dawn of the 1600s. So this was well after Ponce de León's landing. He was basically told by the king to write a history of the last 100 years or so of the Castilians and the New World. And he'd like to have that tomorrow, please, that kind of thing. So Herrera was really up against the wall. And he's often accused of being a plagiarist, but really he had to summarize a lot of history. And so maybe it's good in a way that he copied a lot of the accounts that were around at the time, because one of the things that we do not have is the original accounts of Ponce de León's visit to Florida and exactly what happened. But Herrera copies a lot of it down for us. He also used Escalante Fontaneda's memoir, which was composed about 1575, as one of his sources. Another source, a very important one, is the Freducci map of 1515, which was drawn by the Count of Ottomano Freducci in Italy. It had to have been based on the accounts of Ponce de León, again, which are not available to us. But as you can clearly see, it's a good map. It shows the coast of Florida coming down around here. Here's the 10,000 Islands, the Florida Keys, and up the coast about that far. A very good rendering of Cuba over here. Here's Hispaniola, present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Over in this area here, the Bahamas Islands. This shows not only the coast of Florida, but it also shows some place names. In this next slide, I've turned the map on its side. Here again is the east coast of Florida, because the place names are written in this direction. So here's Cape Canaveral and that area around here. But importantly for our story about the Calusa, there are two place names right here in the domain of the Calusa. One is Huchi or Gucci, and the other is Stababa, right here. Now later, Fontaneda, who was a captive of the Calusa for 17 years and was captured as a child at 13 and lived among the Calusa and is an eyewitness to the Calusa, talks about an Escambaba being the capital of the Calusa at the time when Menendez arrived in 1566. So we we can be very sure, I think, that Stababa and Escambaba are the same place. So the 1513 voyage we've already heard quite a bit about, so I won't dwell on that. I want to talk mainly about what happened here in May 23rd when they arrive in coastal southwest Florida near Sanibel Island. They, of course, needed water. Everybody needs water. They have to replenish their supplies from time to time, and firewood for cooking. The ships found a passage. It can almost surely be decided that it was near Sanibel Island, and I agree with Dr. Gannon. The San Cristobal is careened for repairs at that point, and this is Douglas Peck's drawing of what the San Cristobal might have looked like at the time. So here they are anchored, 1513 voyage. About sometime between the 23rd and June 4th, some Indians come across the lagoon perhaps to barter, to trade, and they're contacting the Spaniards. The Indians try to grab hold of the anchor cables of one of the ships. The Spaniards take this as a sign of hostility, whether it was or not, we don't really know. But they attack the Indians, they go ashore, and they haul off 4 of the Indian women. Douglas Peck has a rather flowery account of what the Spaniards might have had in mind for the 4 Indian women, but we won't go into that. Anyway, one of the important things about the accounts of this is that one of the Indians speaks to these discoverers of Florida for the first time in Spanish. So the Indians also say that, well, this King Calusa over here has gold. You guys might want to go talk to him, trying to, get him to do something else. And so there's something that goes on here, perhaps because the Spaniards have taken captives, perhaps because they've been deemed to be hostile. The Indians come in 20 canoes and attack the ships, and they kill one Spaniard. And several Indians are killed as well. And so at this point, Ponce's men take even more captives. And you can see the situation is getting out of control here. First it's sort of exploratory, then it's taking captives, then it's skirmishing. Now there's more killings and there's more captives. This is really getting out of hand. So in June 5th or so, the Indians come to the ship and they say, well, this guy Calusa, this king, has all this gold, is going to come and trade with you tomorrow. So don't go anywhere. Don't you just stay right here. He's going to come see you tomorrow. And instead, later that day, warriors in 80 canoes attack the ships, and they shoot arrows at the ships. They're not very effective because they can't get up into the Spanish ships, but they are clearly sending a message to the Spaniards: you are not welcome here. We want you to leave. You're not landing on this shore. So this sort of sham battle goes on for an entire day. This is a map that shows maybe a little bit better where these places were located. The place which I believe is Escambaba or Stababa is Mound Key here in Estero Bay, just behind Estero Island, which is Fort Myers Beach. The second largest town of the Calusa was here at Tampa, which is now today the Pineland site. And then I think this almost surely has to be, this is just my opinion, I've not read this anywhere else, but the Huchi or Gucci or Tucci that's mentioned in the records is probably right here. So here's where the Spanish ships are, between Sanibel and Huchi or Gucci, which might be Punta Rasa. Now you might wonder how we could muster, how the Calusa could muster 80 canoes all of a sudden to attack the Calusa. Well, if you have the second largest town here with about 500 or so people living here, the Calusa living in the town of Tampa, or Pineland, have built a 2.5 mile long canal across the island. So they can easily move across Pine Island, through Matlacha Pass, down this side, unnoticed by the Spaniards, to come to this spot. Of course, from Stababa or Escambaba or Calos, we can have more canoes coming out from this on the other side of Fort Myers Beach, coming into this area. And perhaps even some people were called to come down the Caloosahatchee River and encountered the Spaniards. So this is where the action is. Everything's kind of happening at that spot, and I think the historians who have determined that it was near Sanibel Island surely are right. Some people, like the historian Fuson, believes that maybe they landed up on Pine Island, that they careened the ship up in Pine Island Sound. But knowing Pine Island Sound as I do, this area up in here is extremely shallow. This side over here is extremely shallow. I cannot imagine that you would have careened a ship and expected it to ever come out of there. So as you've seen, as we've already heard today, they move off at a safe distance. They anchor there for a few days. They come back and replenish their wood and water supplies, and then they're out of there. They sail southwest to the Dry Tortugas, which Professor Gannon described for you a while ago. So now what's happening between the 1513 and the 1521 expeditions of Ponce de Leon? Well, we know one account says that in late 1516 or early 1517, Diego de Velázquez, the governor of Cuba, is actually sending slave hunting expeditions to Florida. This is in a clear violation of Ponce de Leon's license to settle Florida. He's the person who's supposed to be doing this exploration of Florida. But bad things have happened to Ponce de Leon. Ferdinand has died, and he was the person who was the most supportive of Ponce de Leon's exploits. And so he's trying to see if he still has the right to do these things in Florida. Meanwhile, the people in Cuba and Hispaniola are sort of ignoring Ponce de Leon and going ahead and exploring other areas and getting more active. One of those people who was getting active in the area was Francisco Hernandez de Cordoba. And he, in March, moves from Cuba to the Yucatan and attacks the Mayan area, the Mayan coast there. And unlike the people in Hispaniola and Puerto Rico and the Florida Indians that had been encountered by Ponce de León, the Mayans actually have armor. They have a very thick cotton that resists the slashing swords of the Spaniards. The Spanish matchlock cannons, the arquebuses, are very difficult to load and to it takes time to do all these things. And so really the method of attack is a slashing sword, which cuts or disembowels the people very quickly. The Mayans, though, had this armor with very thick cotton and could resist. So that and other possible miscues by the Spaniards meant that they were soundly defeated. They were badly injured. They had run out of supplies. They're desperately in need of fresh water. They're trying to get back to Cuba. So Cordoba is in a really bad fix here. Well, it just so happens that his pilot is Alaminos, the same guy who was the pilot for Ponce de Leon's 1513 voyage. So what are we going to do? And so Alaminos says, wait, I know a place where we can go and get water and wood. I know this place. I piloted there before, and so they decide to sail to Southwest Florida. And so they land in the same place that Ponce de Leon had landed in 1513, where, of course, they are attacked by the Calusa. Once more, they kill some Spaniards. They grab one of the Spanish boats and carry it off, and the Spaniards have to go get it back. It's just a big mess one more time. So the Spaniards finally get some supplies that they can, and battling off the Spaniards the entire time, they set sail for Havana, where Cordoba himself dies. And once again, an expedition to Florida, to the southwest Florida coast, has ended in death, disappointment, and failure. So in the meantime, all this activity is going on. Ponce de Leon is very concerned. He's lost political favor. There are people just basically ignoring him and disrespecting him, his authority in the Indies. So all this activity is going on. So he decides that it's now or never. He has to stake his claim to Florida, and the best way he can do that, he still has the licenses to do so, the best way he can do that is to form a colony. He needs to send people there with men, women, and animals and seeds to plant crops and get all this established here. So in March of 1521, it so happens that the Spaniards again arrive in southwest Florida. And here the records are so sketchy that we really don't even know where he landed. It may have been in the same place as before. It doesn't sound like a very good place to plant seeds, or it probably was somewhere inland a little bit from that area. He must have traveled through familiar waters to land in southwest Florida, but we really do not know where the colony that he tried to form was. But they were there for some number of months. And the same story again in July of 1521. The Calusa Indians overwhelm and defeat the Spaniards. Ponce de Leon himself suffers an arrow wound, and they retreat, they withdraw from the area. The colony is a failure, and on or about the middle of June of 1521, Ponce de Leon himself dies in Havana at the age of 47. So that's Ponce de Leon's stories and their interactions with the Calusa. So who were these Calusa people who were so resistant and so belligerent and so bellicose? That is the idea that you get. When I was growing up in Tampa in the 50s and 60s, if we got any history about Florida Indians and the Spaniards, it was always, well, if Indians had to be sort of gotten out of the way so that we could have civilization here, and there was always a paragraph or two about the Indian people. Well, just who were these people and why were they so mean? Well, the Calusa themselves were maybe 20,000 people or so living in maybe 50 or 60 villages across southwest Florida. They are mainly a fishing people. They're fisher-gatherer hunters. They're not people who raise corn or manioc or any of the staple crops that people were used to knowing about in the Caribbean and other places in South America. They are chiefdoms, that is, they have a hierarchical form of governance, and they live in their villages all during the year. And the Calusa themselves, although they're based here in southwest Florida in the Charlotte Harbor, Pine Island Sound area, they have influence all over the southern part of Florida. So they have political relationships, marriage relations as far away as Cape Canaveral. They're drawing tribute or taxation from Lake Okeechobee and eastern Florida and the Florida Keys and Miami. All of this is coming into this capital here at Mound Key. So basically all of South Florida is under the control of the Calusa Indian people. Here's a map that shows that in a little bit more detail. This is enlarging the area that's over here. And here you see the Mayaca River, the Peace River, and the Caloosahatchee River all flowing in, bringing fresh water into this broad, flat, grassy estuary, a very, very rich source of fish, and surrounded and protected by barrier islands here. You really couldn't ask for a richer environment to be a fishing culture in. And here you see the two major towns that I mentioned a while ago. Calos, or so the Spaniards pronounce it as Carlos because that was a name familiar to them, which is the largest town and the capital of the Calusa, and then the second largest of the towns was Tampa. And you notice the name Tampa, of course, this is not Tampa Bay. Through a mapmaker's error, the Bay of Tampa was later transposed all the way up here, and so today's Tampa Bay is up here. The original name Tampa and the Bay of Tampa that's a Calusa name. And so right there is the original Tampa. Yeah, I'm actually born and raised in modern day Tampa, so this is a double irony for me. So I end up working at the original Tampa, right? So what do we know archaeologically? Well, certainly by the 14th century, we have Indians living, several hundred people at Pineland, for example. This is an artist's conception by Merrill Clark of our Calusa Heritage Trail sign images there at Pineland that you can see if you come down and visit. We have midden mounds that are large and linear, some 30 feet high. People are living in these large houses, very well organized fishing. There are people who are nobles who are in control of the society, commoners that are doing the work. The main source of protein, the daily food supply for the Calusa is netted fishes. There's a 6,000-year net fishing tradition in this area. So they mainly support themselves through fishing. But we have town chiefs presiding over each town, and then a paramount chief, or a king, as the Spaniards referred to him, King Calos, who governed over all of the town chiefs, and he lived at Maunki in Estero Bay. They had a very well-developed spiritual life. They had a trinity of gods that they believed in. They believed in an afterlife. One of the souls of their three souls that they possessed would last forever. They practiced arts, including music. They had synchronized singing. When Pedro Menendez de Aviles met with King Calos in 1566, 500 Indian girls sang in a synchronized manner outside of the meeting place in honor of Menendez's visit. They painted, they carved, they engraved, they had massed processions of priests. This was a very complicated, well-established, competent culture. It's easy to think of fishing people just kind of scrabbling around looking for their next meal. These were sophisticated people who were well-connected. There were also engineers. I mentioned the Pineland Canal a while ago, Pine Island Canal. It's over 2 miles long, 2.5 miles long, and goes all the way from Pineland, 30 feet wide, 6 to 8 feet deep, with control structures and feeder ponds that let water in and out at times when there was needed. So these people have been established a long time. They have figured out how to live in this area, and they are artists. They are militarily superior people in their area. They draw tribute, and they are engineers as well. And I would say also that they're very well connected. We find at the Pineland site, for example, galena, or lead ore, that's used to make a kind of a glittery paint by southeastern people. Galena is found all the way down here at the Pineland site, dating to about 1350 AD. Quartz crystals, greenstone, quartzite, and other exotic stones are traded into this area, and the Calusa must be trading other things up into this area. And in historic times, when the ships run aground on this very treacherous area over here that Dr. Gannon mentioned about the Gulf Stream, and how the ships were actually being pulled back even though they had full sails. This area was still the source of some shipwrecks in the early 1500s, and so metals were being brought, and captives were being brought to Calusa at the same time. So what do we know about the Calusa from eyewitness accounts? So one of the eyewitnesses is Escalante Fontaneda, the boy of 13 who lived among the Calusa for 17 years and later wrote a memoir about his experiences in 1575. And you can read, maybe you can read that. I'll read it to you if you can't see it too well. Here's some of the things that Fontaneda says about the Calusa during his captivity. The territory of Carlos, or Calos, a province of Indians in which their language signifies a fierce people. They are so called for being brave and skillful, as in truth they are. And he says the people, the Calusa people, understand the greater part of our strategy and are archers and men of strength. And then this is really interesting. He also tells us that at times past, before Menendez arrived in the 1560s, many Indians of Cuba entered the ports of the province of Calos, and the father of King Calos, whose name was Senquini, stopped those persons and made a settlement of them, the descendants of whom remain to this day. So this is the first Cuban refugees coming into Florida. Now, this is happening, probably around in the teens. So why did this happen? Why would some Indians of Cuba want to come to Southwest Florida? Well, what's already been mentioned by both of our speakers before, slavery in the Caribbean started quite early. In fact, Columbus even took slaves back on his first voyage. By 1509, we're having slave raids being conducted into the Bahamas Islands. The notion that the Spaniards had was when they came to the New World, the Indians were there to work for them. And of course they would get benefits. They would be converted to Christianity and their souls would be saved, and there would be lots of good things that would happen by becoming Spaniards. But basically you could use them for work. It's not exactly slavery in the sense of ownership, but it is almost exactly that. But that is, there weren't any there's really no choice that the Indians had, and if they resisted, they were simply killed. So in desperation, some of these Cuban natives had escaped to Florida. And so some Indians we know from Cuba or Hispaniola were in Florida before Ponce de León arrived because they spoke to him in Spanish. In short, slaving has been happening in Florida probably since 1500, if not before. And slaving expeditions were going out from Cuba. So the question then, the last question we pose then is, did Ponce de León really discover Florida? It's been alluded to already by our first two speakers. Well, yes and no. He is the first, as Meredith said, the first official recorder of Florida. It's good to commemorate our state. This is a good time to pause and reflect on some of the history of our state, including the good, the bad, and the ugly. But Ponce de León himself, well, yes, he did and he didn't. Lots of people were in Florida before Ponce de León. The cultural context is simply that the Calusa they may have been tough guys, but the reason they attacked the Spaniards is probably because they knew exactly what they were all about. They had known about the Cuban refugees, they knew about the shipwrecks, they knew about the slaving expeditions, and so they knew that they were not going to welcome the Spaniards with open arms. So there were more expeditions that Dr. Deegan has covered. I will leave it at that. I've talked mostly about the two that are pictured here that came, Ponce de León and Cordoba, and there were others that came into the Southwest Florida area. But they would come again and again and again, and finally Florida would be conquered by the Spaniards. But as we think about those conquerings and that settlement of Florida, I think it's good to reflect on the fact that the people living here as natives before were not ignorant savages. They were well-accomplished people who lived in the area, who had governments, they had religions, they had traditions, they had lives that were changed forever by the Spanish conquest of Florida. Thank you very much.